Recording.
My name is Rudy McGoy. I want to talk to you about this film. It's a film about gratitude. It's about my father who died in June of 2014. He was my stepfather. His name was Wayne Chops Derrick. He's not my biological father, but he was my dad. The loss of him has caused me to reflect on my own journey and how I met him and his impact on my life and the challenges I experienced growing up and how I was able to overcome it, and his influence over me. My mother raised us. She raised her 5 children in South Bronx. And it was a very difficult and traumatic experience for me growing up there. The time that we spent there, I remember the community that I lived in, where there was a lot of crime, a lot of violence, a lot of drugs. And basically my father abandoned us and left us without food and shelter or protection. But thank God for my mother. She rose to the challenge of raising us, and she moved us to Spanish Harlem for a little while before moving to the Staten Island community of New Brighton in 1973. Back then, I remember when I was leaving, I was telling my friends that I was moving to the country. Excuse me. And attended 4th grade in New Brighton, and would play in the park, and I found a basketball in Mahoney Park, and really loved the game of basketball. That's when I first became introduced to the game of basketball. We would play in the park. Really didn't know how to play, but my mother made another decision for us to move to West Brighton. And little did I know, the move to West Brighton was going to change our lives for the better forever. I moved to West Brighton. My neighbor, Steve Robinson, who lived on the 8th floor of my building, he took me underneath his wing, and he was a basketball star, and he's a basketball legend. Taught me how to play. Took me over to PS18. I remember as we were going to PS18, I was walking on the grass of PS18. He said, "Man, you better get off that grass." I said, "Why?" He says, "You don't want Chops to see you walking on the grass." I had no idea who Chops was. I thought Chops he was referring to a dog or something that was going to come running out of the bushes. And he told me who Chops was. Chops was the custodian in the building. And everybody knew Chops. And I remember when I first met Chops, it was because I was walking on the grass, and he came out of one of the side doors and said, "Hey, get off the grass." He had this loud, booming voice, and that was kind of funny. But the other thing that I remember about Chops was when I attended PS18 in the 5th grade, how everybody knew him and everybody called him by the name Chops. But also, my my first introduction to the school in the school year was talk about the Wayne Derrick Award, which is named after him, and it was an award that all the students in the school they wanted to win this award, and it was so important to the kids that you knew that if you misbehaved, or if you got in a fight, or you didn't study hard in school, that you ran the risk of not getting the award. And I remember meeting Lenny Palmer, who was a classmate, and he was always a good student. And I talk about how we didn't always get along. We competed, and we were supposed to have this fight at the end of the school year, which we put off until the end of the school year as to not jeopardize his chances of winning the award. So all those things I remember. I also remember how different the school environment was. Just in terms of the expectation that Chops had and teachers had for us at the school. And I remember practicing and working on my game and trying to make the school basketball team, which I didn't, but I was able to make the basketball team for the citywide organization, citywide league, I should say. The Chops had an organization called the Bachelors. Excuse me. And that was a unique experience as well. I just remember playing for the Bachelors, playing in the Biddy division, which was for like the little guys. And I just remember how we used to meet at the school in the early in the morning on Saturday morning. And the coach at the time was Darryl Kress. And there would be several teams, and what I remember most about that was two things. Was that they were teenagers, and Darryl was a teenager then. They were mentors, and just the responsibility of taking care of us and teaching us and leading us. But also the other thing that I remember was Chops coming, because Chops didn't drive. So there would be all these kids in front of the school, and he would provide transportation to and from the game. And he would call, back then I guess it was Sam's Taxi. He would call the cab company, and we would all pile into these cars, and they would take us to the game. It would be like 5 cars. And I always remember Chops going into his pocket to pay for these cabs. And I remember playing in these games, and at the end of the games making sure we got home safe. And also making sure we had juice. If you didn't have sneakers, he made sure that he provided sneakers for the kids to participate in, to play in the games and the practice, uniforms, and create a lot of moments and some very good times for us. And early on, our goal, what was reinforced to us, was that we would go over to the city and play in the playoffs and win a city championship. And that was drilled into us at an early age, and that was our focus for a long time. And eventually, when I was a junior in high school, we went to play in Madison Square Garden at the Felt Forum, and we won. And I just remember how everyone celebrated that win. We won in double overtime, and the thing that I think, as I think back on it, the thing that Chops really emphasized to us was that we were representing more than just ourselves. We weren't just playing for us as individuals, but we were playing for our community and our borough. And it was really, sports was really like a metaphor for life, in terms of what we could do in sports, we could do for life. I mean, we prepared, and worked hard. And Chops emphasized education, and stressed education. And if you love sports, if you wanted to play, you had to go to school. So, the other thing that Chops did for me personally was that he gave me a job. And when I was in 7th grade, I used to go to the school after school and clean, help him clean the school, clean the classroom and stuff, so I could have some money in my pocket at the end of the week. So, and he didn't only help me; he helped the entire community. Chops, at the point that Chops was helping me with sports and helped me with a job and everything. He hadn't. I was just another kid in the community, because he hadn't met my mother yet, and this was something that he did for everyone in the community. And in a lot of ways, he raised us, and he reared us. And when I say reared, he responded to our needs, and he helped to prepare us for our futures in terms of what he was able to provide. He provided after-school programs and utilized the school to provide jobs through the neighborhood youth board. And how he eventually met my mother was through a basketball league that he sponsored called Future Stars, and it was a league that he had two teenagers, Dwight Joyner and Dow Kress, put it together. And kids from other communities were able to come down, and we were able to compete. And they always had themes like the Stay in School tournament or the Back to School tournament, and they would have the gym lined up with people in the neighborhood, and they'd have music, and we would come out and we would come out and play. And I remember my mother coming out to see me play. And one year they had it in the West Brighton basketball court in the projects. And I think that's when they first met. But also, when I was playing in the citywide tournament, I had to produce a birth certificate to prove my age, and somehow it was misplaced, or my mother didn't receive it, and my sister Melanie pointed Chops out to my mother, and she spoke to him about the birth certificate, and he got her the birth certificate back. And you know, they started to date, and eventually they got married, and he raised 5 children that were not his own, on top of everything that he did. And so I asked myself, and I've had many conversations with him as to why he did it. See, Chops was not a person that talked about what he did. He didn't brag about what he did. He just did it. And he worked really hard. But the bottom line was that he always said it was about the kids. That's all he cared about, was providing us with opportunities. And I think that looking back on his life and understanding how he grew up, because he was raised by his mother, and she died when he was, I believe, he was about 6 years old when she passed away. And then he talked to me about being in an orphanage for a short time before his family came and got him and adopted him. But that was a very traumatic experience for him, to have experienced loss and separation at an early age. But Mr. Smith, his father, was good to him, and he always talked about Mr. Smith's influence and how hard he worked and how he opened up doors for him. And Chops knew the importance of having a mentor and having, you know, mothers are important, of course, but you got to have male influences as well. And so, you know, they had put the Bachelor organization together. It was a group of black men that reached out and created opportunities for the kids in the community. The Chops also understanding the lack of jobs and the importance of having jobs. And growing up on Staten Island, I believe it's, you know, there are twice as many people as there were employers on Staten Island, and you would have to travel to other boroughs for work. And the better paying jobs were usually off the island. The ones that paid, the good paying jobs like Procter & Gamble, you know, you were fortunate if you could get in there. But one of the things that he realized was that, you know, if you had to travel to Manhattan or Brooklyn, your kids were in school, who was gonna pick up your kids? What happens to your kids when you have to work overtime, or you can't. The schedule conflicts with your job hours. So he had the after school program, which was a safe haven for us, because he never allowed anything to happen to us while we were in any illegal activities. Some of the things that some of the activities in the after school program, aside from the tutoring, and I remember Mr. Obi was one of the people that worked in the after school program, and he focused on not just recreational activities but SAT preparation. Ping pong, he was a guy that you could never beat in ping pong. They had the board games, and of course, you had basketball, which everybody loved to play. And you had the weight room, where you could go and work out. The older boys or teenagers could go and work out with Mr. Boylan. And it was something for everybody, pretty much. But I also think about Chops, the thought that went into it, because Chops understood that it was different for us growing up on Staten Island. In terms of parks and access to other programs. These programs, there were other people like Richard Finelli and Mr. Newcomb that they had their programs for within the community as well. But the infrastructure, the lack of infrastructure to the North Shore, also played a role in Chops utilizing the school. And he utilized the school from his position as a custodian, and that became the center of community life for many of us. But I also, in thinking about why Chops did it, I think about Chops's early experiences. I remember talking about him coming up, and he didn't spend a lot of time on history. He talked a lot about his experiences, but he never complained, never saw himself as a victim, and he wouldn't allow you to see yourself as a victim. He just talked about the challenges that we would face in life, and how we had to strive to overcome those challenges. And when he was 16 years old, I remember, at 16 years old, he talked about Emmett Till and the story of Emmett Till. And Emmett Till was, I think, 14 years old when that horrible murder occurred in Mississippi, which is credited with starting the civil rights movement. And also, that helped that helped shape Chops' worldview. I mean, because being black and growing up and having to deal with some of these challenges. Chops attended school at South Carolina State during a time where there was segregation and inequality where you had to ride on the back of the bus. You couldn't eat in the same, restaurants with white folks. It was very turbulent times. And during the time that he went to attend school down there, they were having the sit-ins, the lunch counters, which some of the, I think it was the NAACP Youth Council had in 1958, when Chops was at South Carolina State. They had started their sit-ins, and the first one was in Kansas City, I think in Wichita, Kansas. And they these students sat at the counters in white restaurants, and they were successful. But what happened was you had more black colleges that were in the South that were forcing integration, and it was met with resistance throughout the South, but particularly in South Carolina. And when he was in school playing football, there were some protests taking place, and the local townspeople and the sheriff's department, they were very certainly they were opposed to the protests, and they didn't want integration, they wanted segregation. And so with Chops being a standout football player, they didn't want the students to follow the athletes and the stars of the team. Chops was one of his teammates was Deacon Jones. Deacon Jones went on to become a NFL Hall of Famer. But I remember when Deacon Jones died, he passed away in 2013, a year before Chops passed away. I was watching a sports show and they were talking about Deacon Jones sitting in at the with one of the protests, the counter sit-ins, and I had never known anything about that, so I asked Chops, and Chops said that never happened. And when you look at history, you research it, he was accused of taking part in a protest demonstration, but he never did. What happened was that they took his scholarship away, Deacon Jones' scholarship away, because he was accused of getting involved in the civil rights movement. But they also took Chops' scholarship away. And when I spoke to Chops about it, he told me that what happened was that the sheriff confronted the athletes on the team, and he basically warned them and threatened them and told them that they better leave the state. So the sheriff basically threatened them, and they were forced to leave. And Deacon Jones, I believe, when he left school, he was found, he was picking apples like upstate New York or something like that. And they had video of him. He went to Mississippi Valley Votech, I believe. And then the rest was history with him. But with Chops, he he returned home, and then he went into the Army. And he served a couple years in the Army. And he also had a tryout with a pro football team, which was the AFL Titans, who later became, once the two leagues merged, became the New York Jets. But he wanted the security of a job and employment, and he took the position at PS18, and the rest is history. But realizing the significance of his experience at South Carolina State during that time, you know, it would have been nothing for, you know, back then they were lynching black men and killing black men, and, you know, basically if you challenged the system of segregation, as we saw with a lot of the civil rights leaders that ended up being murdered, and Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King. But also, I learned, and this is not something I learned in school, but after Chops left South Carolina State in 1968, there was a protest involving the students at South Carolina State. It was called the Orangeburg Massacre. And what resulted was the police killing 3 college students and wounded 50 other people, all because they were protesting for equal rights. So I think the combination of things that Chops experienced in his life, he realized the importance of opportunity. He was a real person, a real man who understood the challenges of life and wanted to give back to the community, and he did. He took a simple idea and he made it happen. And he was there for us for over 33 years. And like I said, he responded to not just my needs, but the needs of an entire community and communities. So when Chops, eventually Chops retired and he moved to Delaware. And, you know, he was, no matter where Chops went, he just had that influence over people. He would meet people, he would embrace people, and people just loved him because he was just a good person. Eventually he became ill, and he was ill for a number of years, which eventually it affected him physically, and he lost some of his independence and you know, his ability to move around and stuff. And I just remember the community rising to the challenge, and you know, just staying connected to Chops and reaching out to him and calling him. In 2002, people from different communities got together, and we had a barbecue in Delaware in the park. You had people coming from California and, you know, different parts of the country. We put money together, and we gave him gifts, and it was just a show of appreciation, where we all came together. Some of us were athletes, you know, played in programs, but some of us weren't didn't play ball. You know, there were a lot of women, females that grew up in the community that came. There were other members of the community that went to school at PS18 that came, that were growing up, you know, adults. And we had music, and we shared memories and experiences, and it's always been that way when it comes to Chops. When Chops was in his final days before, or I should say months, when he was transitioning, you had people coming down and visiting him. Remember Alonzo Duff every Wednesday drove to Delaware from New York. Every Wednesday he would come and meet Chops, spend time with Chops. And Chops was, you know, Chops, he was in a lot of pain, but he didn't complain. He he just dealt with it. And I regret that I didn't spend more time with him. I wish I would have spent more time. But he knew, you know, I had the obligations of a job and family responsibilities. I did what I could, but I'll forever be thankful to Chops. You know, he gave my mother some wonderful years together. You know, my mother made tremendous sacrifices for us, and I prayed for her each day that she would meet someone come into her life that would, you know, treat her right and give her some happiness, which Chops was able to provide. He was a good man. He helped my brothers. You know, they went to private school. They went to probably the best private school on Staten Island, got a good education, and he was protective and it provided security, and he was, you know, Chops, I could never repay you for all you've done. You made my life better, and I thank you. You know, hopefully you'll learn from this film the story of his life, and how you don't have to be rich. You don't have to be super educated, but education is important. But irregardless of your level of education or how much money you make, we can all do something to make our lives better, to give back to the community and pay forward and give our thanks and show our thanks and appreciation by helping someone else. They don't understand. You know, I have time too, and for you to invite me to your house and sit there and I'm sitting there watching the game and everything, then you're like, I'm not ready to do this. That's just, I could have been doing something else.
I'm not ready to do this.
People is something else.
So, well, most people don't take the video stuff seriously. You tell them that you have an idea, and then they support you, and then you show up and you're ready to go, and then like, oh, wait.
Yeah. That's why I sent it to Eileen. Eileen and Sheila. Eileen, his wife.
Oh, right, yeah.
And she saw it, and Tia, her daughter, saw it. So, you know, she probably showed it to them. You know, it makes a difference, because if I show up, they know that's not my background, so they figure it's going to be some Facebook type of it, you know.
Yeah. People get nervous when
Well,
they
they'd
show
be
up with the camera.
surprised.
Yeah, well, when he saw the bag and the tripod, and
Right, you get nervous. It's like, oh, he's really he's
Yeah.
gonna do